Hi, everyone. I'm Lisa Henderson, the Editorial Director of Applied Clinical Trials, and I'm here today with Janita Hammock, Senior Vice President of Clinical Operations for Parexel. And Janita is going to discuss the impact of decentralized clinical trials from the perspective of investigative sites. And her insights come from her responsibilities for site management in Europe and the Americas. She was previously the Vice President in Quality Management and has a demonstrated history of working in the pharmaceutical, medical device, and CRO industries in the areas of quality management, clinical monitoring, project management, site management, as well as a number of other clinical trial-related areas. So thank you for joining us today, Janita.
Thank you, Lisa. It's a pleasure to be here.
COVID has had a large impact on how sites conduct business. With the rapid adoption of decentralized trials, or DCT, roles change to adjust to the changing demands. So Janita, what are some of the changes you've seen at sites as a result of DCT and some of the challenges they are now facing due to the implementation of DCT over the past several years?
Great question. I'd like to provide information on the background of DCTs. Implementation of elements of DCT at sites may include telemedicine or home visits, remote monitoring, direct-to-patient IP shipments, electronic documentation and systems such as consent forms, investigator site files, and others. An increased number of technologies have been implemented at sites in addition to the systems already being utilized in clinical trials. Many DCT studies are hybrid studies with both traditional and DCT elements, which increases the complexity of the trials. These studies often require increased flexibility to meet the needs of the study population. Multiple options are often needed for a specific clinical trial element instead of a single solution, which requires different processes. For example, some study patients may be comfortable with only one type of visit, such as in-clinic, televisit, or home visit. Each type of visit may require different procedures of different people or vendors to conduct the visits. Another example is the use of wearable devices provided by the sponsor, or a patient may be allowed to bring their own device. Investigators must be able to instruct patients on collection of data for different devices and also ensure that the data is transmitted for all types of devices that are utilized. The impact of increased utilization of technologies and systems at sites, both in number as well as complexity, has influenced how site personnel conduct clinical trials. Ultimately, these factors result in increased demands on workload, impacting site staff resources. Technology and the multitude of systems and platforms can be a significant burden for sites. Some studies may utilize 10 or more systems or vendors. Site staff must obtain access to these systems and know how to use each of them. In addition, the training demands on site staff may be high for an individual system or across systems. In some cases, a PI may personally be required to complete multiple hours of training to access a single system used by a sponsor. This results in administrative burden for the site staff, possible delays in study startup, and occasionally a PI deciding to discontinue participation in the trial due to inadequate time and resources. While considering design of DCT studies, a sponsor should consider how to best ensure a clinician is able to continue to engage with his or her patients from the medical and scientific perspective and not be unnecessarily burdened with the administrative aspects of complex trials.
So Janita, you did discuss a lot of issues with the burden on the sites. So what can sponsors, CROs, and others do to support investigators and study site personnel to effectively implement DCT as well as lessen that burden on sites?
Another great question, Lisa. Thank you. When designing a clinical trial, the voice of the patient and the voice of site personnel needs to be considered through panel discussions and reviews. Currently, for a number of DCT studies, there's multiple systems that must be used by site personnel. They're fragmented, resulting in inefficiencies for site personnel to log into and utilize those systems. Coupling of technologies or multi-purpose platforms that allow single sign-on for ease of use would reduce administrative burden by site personnel. This would allow site personnel to log into a main system and be able to more easily record data, resulting in streamlined use of technology, reduction in the management of username and passwords, as well as reduced training requirements. In addition, multi-purpose platforms would allow the collection and reporting of comprehensive patient data for increased visibility into a patient's clinical status. The PI ultimately needs the ability to view all the patient data in a consolidated manner. This will improve efficiency and provide visibility so the PI can assess the patient holistically based on all data sources. Automated transmission of data from the technology to vendors or sponsor systems should be built into study processes in order to reduce the burden on site personnel from manually uploading data, which is time consuming and creates risk for missing data if transmissions are missed or are incomplete. This would also result in real-time data availability if the uploads are programmed to occur frequently. Streamlined processes for system access should also be implemented, as well as ensuring reasonable and reduced training requirements in order to eliminate unnecessary steps and time for site personnel to obtain access to systems. Simple and concise instructions should be provided to site personnel to guide them in the use of systems and technology. Ideally, clinical trial systems should be developed based on workflow management. So end users, essentially site personnel, are walked step by step through the process and system in a streamlined manner to reduce time, as well as the need for vendor support in order to access and navigate the system. A dedicated help desk should be available around the clock to help site personnel with access or technology issues when issues arise to avoid disruptions in the clinical trial. For remote monitoring via direct electronic medical record access or via certified electronic copies or management of an electronic investigator site file, the workflow and time required by site personnel to provide access or provide electronic documentation must be assessed, minimized, resourced, and budgeted appropriately. As an industry, we need to simplify the journey for both the patient and site personnel for all trials, and especially DCTs. As an example, the integration of home health visits into a clinical trial must be appropriate for the study population, and patients must be comfortable with these types of visits. This element of DCT should be easy for investigators to implement without unnecessary challenges. The integration of these processes must be straightforward, seamless, and ultimately minimize the number of individuals, groups, or vendors that the site personnel need to coordinate with or regularly communicate and interact with.
So with the next question, how do we see DCT evolving in this perspective, the site perspective, over the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah. From the site perspective, the sites will continue to see an increase in the number and type of technologies used in these studies. It'd be beneficial if more companies will emerge that can provide enhanced and more comprehensive suites of technology options that can be bundled and implemented on a study for ease of use by site personnel, as well as sponsors and CROs. Likewise, enhanced patient applications and technologies will likely become available that cover broader DCT elements for use in studies, as well as improved patient user interfaces. Site staff capabilities and expertise will likely continue to evolve to include their existing medical expertise, along with the increased expertise with new technologies, which may result in site personnel becoming even more tech savvy in the future. Ultimately, DCTs need to continue to evolve for increased effectiveness and improved ease of use for site personnel and study patients in order to be able to reach patients, make it easy for patients to remain in the study while reducing the burden to site personnel. Essentially, DCT should reach the right balance of science and technology in the future. As DCT continues to improve and evolve, many doors will be open to allow flexibility in clinical trial conduct. Disruption in clinical trials should be minimized, even when patients are unable to go to a hospital or clinic. There'll be an increase in opportunities for patients with rare diseases or for patients who are in remote locations to have access to and participate in clinical trials. Ultimately, patients worldwide will benefit as the evolution of DCTs continues.
Well, thank you, Janita. Thank you for sharing your expertise with our audience today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak about DCTs on behalf of site personnel and investigator sites.